has recently been smuggled out of Hungary. Much of it has not been seen in this country before. The men who took these films, like the freedom fighters they photographed, risked their lives to compile this record, a record of a losing battle against communist enslavement. The story, Revolt in Hungary. On the morning of Joseph Stalin's funeral in Moscow, all life in Hungary comes to a halt. Where a Catholic church once stood, an enormous statue of Stalin now towers over the scene in Budapest, as Hungarian leaders pay their last respects. Among them is Imre Nagy, one of the leaders of the Communist Party that has ruled Hungary since 1957. Nagy is not one of the inner circle of Stalin's admirers. There are others here whose true feelings are masked behind blank faces. Years later, the statue of Stalin is down. The iron heel of Soviet oppression is being smashed. The people of Hungary are aroused. They shatter all symbols of Soviet power. At last, expressing themselves freely, they demand political liberty and national independence. This is how it all started. In Hungary's capital, university students hold a demonstration in support of Poland. It is a peaceful demonstration triggered by the Poles' successful defiance of the Soviet Union 4 days before. The government orders them to disband. They refuse. More young men and women swell their ranks. They assemble in Petőfi Square, named for the champion of Hungarian freedom in 1848, and recall his stirring words. Shall we free men be or slaves? Choose the lot your spirit craves. Inspired by Petőfi's example, they decide to parade across the city. Now the government belatedly lifts the ban on student meetings. Along the route, cadets, young workers, even members of the communist youth fall in. These are not the faces of brooding conspirators. There's a holiday mood about the procession, an air of hope and enthusiasm. Terminates at the statue of General Bem, a Polish soldier who fought for Hungarian freedom in 1848. The crowd that acclaims Poland's independent spirit numbers tens of thousands. Now its interest quickly shifts to other problems, Hungary's problems. Most of the speakers are communists and favor a communist Hungary. But like Peter Barish of the Writers' Union, they oppose the government leaders for suppressing freedom and distorting the truth, for exploiting labor and abusing the farmers, for serving Soviet imperialism. They demand an end to Soviet domination, national independence, their own flag without Soviet emblems on it. Students post their own program. One of their key demands, a new government led by Imre Nagy to resist Soviet pressure. Then they start marching to the Budapest radio station to make known their demands to the nation and to the world. At the radio station, the students' plans are frustrated. Their delegates are arrested. Angry, the crowd refuses to disperse until student leaders are freed. Defied, the AVO, the security police, acts. During the night, Soviet tanks move in to support the frightened Hungarian government against its own people. By morning of the next day, October 24th, powerful Soviet forces have occupied key positions in Budapest and are moving into battle formation to crush all resistance. As the news spreads, the people of Hungary rally and fight back, enraged by the use of Soviet force. Hungarian army units are sent to suppress the revolt. They go over to the side of the people. Against the superior Soviet power, Hungarians muster their courage and ingenuity. One of their most effective weapons is homemade, according to an old Russian recipe, the Molotov cocktail. Fill one bottle with gasoline nearly to the top. Cork loosely with a rag around the cork. Tip to dampen rag. As the enemy approaches, ignite rag and serve quickly while hot. As the number of knocked-out tanks mounts steadily, the Soviet drive begins to bog down. The Russians are forced to lift the siege of the Kilyan barracks, where a hastily organized defense under Colonel Paul Maliter has withstood violent assault. Soviet losses in this attack are heavy. Some Soviet troops defect, others fraternize. The Red Army begins to withdraw to regroup. Maliter's own tank still stands intact. Underground tunnels link the Kilyan barracks and the Corvine cinema, another center of resistance. Here, too, repeated Russian attacks have been successfully repelled. These are the soldiers who stood up against the Soviet army, a ragged assortment of incredibly brave young people. Many began their military training with the first shot they fired. Others, like the old man known as Uncle Sabo, have become legendary heroes in less than 100 hours. the Soviet units pull back, the freedom fighters take over. Their authority increases in the streets. Hungarian leaders form a new government. One of the first acts of the freedom fighters is to round up all members of the AVO, also known as the AVH, the Hungarian Security Police. Feelings run high against these masters of torture and terror, but suspects are given police protection until they can be tried. Death to the AVO. A task force is sent to arrest AVO agents at Communist Party headquarters. The AVO men resist bitterly. After a violent battle in which many of the defenders are killed, the freedom fighters capture the party headquarters. The crowd takes swift revenge on the few survivors. With the power of the AVO crushed, jails are opened. Political prisoners, mostly held on trumped-up charges, are released. In Budapest and in provincial centers, AVO files are destroyed. Falsified records of forced confessions are burned. Soviet propaganda is added to the bonfires. From the provinces, new waves of political freedom sweep the country. More and more people directly take a hand in deciding their own fate. Their authority is clearly in evidence. The will of the people and of the provinces is equally felt at the top. In Budapest, Imre Nagy is now Prime Minister. He personally receives a delegation of farmers, a direct exchange of views inconceivable only last week. Ranking second in the new regime is János Kadar, a man of driving ambition. Because he was tortured by the Hungarian secret police, Kadar is naturally considered a champion of the new liberalism, a trust he shrewdly exploits. Political parties, long illegal, come into existence again. And new voices and ideas are publicly expressed. Freedom of the press is reestablished after almost 10 years. Before the revolution, there were 5 daily newspapers in Budapest. Now there are more than 20. Each day, each hour brings new developments. Every announcement is awaited with great interest. Imre Nagy reports on negotiations with the Russians. The people listen carefully, excitedly. Then they let him know how they feel. Ruski Haja, the Russians go home. At a Budapest movie, a program is put on the marquee. Russians go home. It is subtitled A Comedy. The morning of October 30th seems to mark the climax of the drama. Soviet armored columns are heading out of Budapest, eastward, out of the country. The belief spreads that the revolution is won. Further evidence of victory comes from the docks of the Danube River. Families of Soviet officers are leaving with all their belongings. As Budapest starts digging itself out of the rubble, a ghastly discovery is made. In Republic Square, human voices are heard calling faintly from below the ground. Pistols are fired in hope of pinpointing a response. It doesn't work. A desperate search begins for AVO victims still buried in secret underground prisons. Whole sections of the square are dug up, but the weak voices finally grow silent and the tragic search is abandoned. One voice that is now heard clearly is that of Cardinal Mindszenty, primate of Hungary. His name becomes a symbol of resistance. Freed after almost 8 years of prison, the Cardinal comes to Budapest. This is his first public statement.
Hosszú fogság után szólok a magyar haza valamennyi gyermekéhez.
It is after a long term of imprisonment that I can now speak to all children of the Hungarian fatherland.
Nincs gyűlölet szívemben.
There is hatred against no one in my heart.
Csodálatra méltó hősiesség szabadítja meg most a hazát.
Our country is being liberated by wonderful heroes.
Világ történelemben páratlan ez a szabadságharc.
There is no parallel in history to this fight for freedom.
Minden dicsőséget megérdemelnek fiataljaink.
Our youth deserves every praise.
Hála és imádság az áldozatokért.
Let us pray for the victims.
Life in Budapest is slowly returning to normal. Food begins to trickle in from the country. In the fraternal mood of the moment, the farmers simply hand it out to those who are hungry. And most everyone is hungry. For the victims of the fighting and their families, collection boxes are set up. And despite the widespread poverty, contributions are generous. Budapest Airport is back in operation, and urgently needed relief supplies start pouring in. From the Soviet satellite of East Germany, from Switzerland, an emergency shipment of blood plasma for the wounded. From Poland, a token of gratitude for Hungary's steadfast support. A gift from the people of Poznan, whose oppression aroused much of the anger that led to the Hungarian uprising. Now food and medicine come in by the truckload as the Austrian frontier is reopened. Even as relief flows in from the free world, there are ominous reports that powerful new Soviet forces are pouring into Hungary from the opposite direction. Budapest is racked with rumors. Each newcomer from the West meets the same anxious questions. Are the Russians coming back? If so, will the UN take action? On November 3rd, Defense Minister Paul Maleder and Minister of State Zoltan Tildy announced good news. An agreement seems to be near that Soviet troops will not return to Budapest. In fact, they will evacuate all of Hungary. Maleder himself is invited to a banquet at Soviet military headquarters to work out the details. The banquet invitation is a trap. Maleder is arrested. Later that night, the Soviets strike. The afternoon of November 4th, 1956. Radio Rakoczy broadcasts its last message to the world.
This is Hungary calling. This is Hungary calling. The last remaining station. Or to the United Nations. Early this morning, the Soviet troops launched a general attack on Hungary. We are requesting you to send us immediate aid in the form of parachute troops over the Trans-Danubian provinces. For the sake of God and freedom, help Hungary!
The call is unanswered. The revolt is crushed, and with it the hopes of the Hungarians who believe that the United Nations or the outraged Western democracies would come to their aid. Hungarian patriots risk death and use hidden cameras to photograph the last tragic act, the cold, empty day of Hungary's defeat. Backed by Russian steel, János Kadar forms a new puppet government. Cardinal Mindszenty is given asylum in the American legation in Budapest. For defying Soviet power, Imre Nagy and Paul Maleder are imprisoned for almost 2 years before receiving the inevitable sentence, death. Much of Hungary, like Budapest, is in ruins. The people who rose in anger and toppled a totalitarian regime are beaten. Once more, the shadow of Soviet terror falls heavily on the land and its people, the victims of the revolt in Hungary.